Welcome, listeners, to the studios of Prasar Bharati here in Panaji. Today, we have a special guest from the Indian Navy who is going to tell us about a very interesting topic which has been in the news recently. As you recall, the Government of India has been considering approving sanctions for a third aircraft carrier of the Indian Navy. India already has two aircraft carriers presently, INS Vikramaditya, which was previously a Russian ship, Admiral Gorshkov, and INS Vikrant, which has been built indigenously by Cochin Shipyard. Many of our listeners might be wondering, what is the importance of having such ships? To tell us that and more, we welcome Commanding Officer, INS Vikramaditya, Captain Vishal Bishnoi. Captain Bishnoi is an alumnus of the National Defence Academy and was commissioned on 1st July 1994. He is a fighter pilot and has flown multiple types of aircraft in his long career spanning 30 years. Trained for air combat on MiG-21s, he has extensively flown Sea Harriers from the erstwhile aircraft carrier INS Virat. He has commanded 3 warships, 1 air squadron and 1 air station. With rich operational experience, the officer also contributed as part of the think tank during his staff appointments as director at the Directorate of Aircraft Acquisition and Directorate of Naval Air Staff at the Naval Headquarters. Prior to taking over the command of the aircraft carrier INS Vikramaditya, the officer was commanding the premier naval air station, INS Dega, at Vishakhapatnam. Welcome to the show, Captain Bishnoi. Let's start with the discussion today. So, what are the roles of the Indian Navy?
So, as per the Indian Maritime Doctrine, there are 4 roles envisaged for the Indian Navy: military, diplomatic, constabulary, and benign.
Could you very briefly explain each of them to us, please?
Yes, starting with the military role, the essence of all navies is their military character. It is to ensure that no hostile maritime power degrades our national security and interests. It is characterized by both offensive and defensive operations to protect our own force, national territory, offshore interests, or maritime trade, and act as deterrence against a conflict.
And what about the diplomatic role?
See, Alfie, in order to build bridges of friendship across the seas, Indian Navy plays diplomatic role to strengthen political relations and goodwill, to strengthen defense relations with friendly states, to portray credible defense posture and capability, to strengthen maritime security in Indian Ocean region, and to promote regional and global security.
I believe you also mentioned constabulary role. What is that all about, Captain?
With an ever-increasing presence of maritime crimes such as terrorism, hijacking, poaching, smuggling, unauthorized exploitation, etc., the Navy in constabulary role maintains good order at sea. This role entails enforcement of law of the land or international mandate for coastal and offshore security. For information, within the maritime zones of India, this enforcement is undertaken by Indian Coast Guard. However, beyond maritime zones of India, the constabulary tasks are vested with the Indian Navy.
Among all these terms, I found the term benign role to be a bit unique. Could you shed some light on that, sir?
Yes, of course. As the word benign suggests, force application has no part to play in its execution. Tasks like providing humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, search and rescue, hydrographic survey, salvage and diving operations are the main ambit of this role. Because of their quick mobilization, maritime forces are especially useful in any crisis in coastal areas and at sea. Judicious utilization of naval assets for assisting friendly foreign countries in the recent past has promoted India's status to first responder.
That is really useful information. Thank you, Captain. Could you further tell us how the Indian Navy conducts and executes its military role?
See, Indian Navy is equipped with various platforms in all the 3 domains of surface, underwater and air. Ships like aircraft carriers, destroyers, frigates, corvettes, amphibious warships, patrol vessels, etc. are meant for surface warfare, whereas submarines for underwater domain and aircraft like fighters, maritime reconnaissance aircraft, helicopters, unmanned aerial vehicles are for air domain.
You mentioned about aircraft carrier. What exactly is an aircraft carrier?
I'll be very happy to tell you about an aircraft carrier as I'm presently commanding the largest and the mightiest ship of the Indian Navy, INS Vikramaditya. An aircraft carrier is a warship that serves as a floating air base, allowing a naval force to launch and recover aircraft at sea. It is equipped with a full-length flight deck and facilities for carrying, arming, deploying and recovering various aircraft. Presently, Indian Navy has two aircraft carriers, namely INS Vikramaditya and INS Vikrant. And I am very proud to tell you that we are one of the 8 countries in the entire world who operates aircraft carriers.
Oh, that's amazing. I was doing some research and I was reading about cheaper warships like frigates or destroyers. But why is it important that we need an aircraft carrier?
See, before the arrival of aircraft carriers, the mastery of seas was dictated by navies that had large battleships. These battleships were the destroyers and frigates that could attack or defend trade or sea assets depending on fuel and refueling capacity. But when air power came into the scenario, battleships lost all their advantages. Fighters and bombers operating from aircraft carriers could strike the surface targets from a distance and they could do nothing about it. The Second World War saw the total eclipse of the battleships by aircraft carriers.
What about the guns? I think there's a gun range also is important to note that.
Absolutely. In fact, I'll brief about air power slightly later.
Okay.
Ever since Second World War, aircraft carriers have dominated naval warfare. In modern times, no war can be won without sufficient air power, either on land or at sea, and that is a fact. And with the question which you asked me, air power, reach, mobility, agility, and flexibility are the main components of air power.
Absolutely. I think I'm getting the picture right now. So why not use the Air Force? Land-based strike aircraft can provide protection to our trade and sink enemy warships as well.
Alfie, you'll be surprised that this question has been asked to me many times, many forums, on many occasions. And you're not the first one who is asking this.
I'm sure I won't be the last.
So let us first understand the geographical expanse of Indian Ocean region. If I tell you that the Indian Ocean is 69 million square kilometers of area, I think it will become very difficult to visualize for you. But consider that its width extends from southern tip of South Africa to Australia, and that width is 10,000 kilometers. From the Persian Gulf to the Antarctica, the length is 13,500 kilometers. There are 9 major choke points that allow shipping into the Indian Ocean. And trust me, there is no air force in the entire world that can provide protection over such a vast area. The sheer number of fighters, bombers, air-to-air refuelers that would be required is simply impossible. And I mean it in every sense of the word, impossible. All land-based aircraft are limited by geography and by endurance. Although we are aware that fighter aircraft can be refueled in air by air-to-air refuelers, but however, when we flying the fighter aircraft over sea, for the planning purposes, we have to maintain at least one diversionary airfield in case of failed air-to-air refueling. And that is why range and reach of the shore-based aircraft is much, much limited. Imagine you had a floating airfield which is mobile and which can travel about 650 kilometers in one day and influence an area of 15 to 20 lakh square kilometer. So that is why land-based strike aircraft cannot provide protection to our trade and sink enemy warships what an aircraft carrier can do. Imagine what flexibility and reach that gives you. Let us say you have an adversary threatening your assets, your trade coming from East Asia, and you had only frigates and destroyers, which he also has. Then you're equally matched depending upon the range of the respective weapons. But if you have an aircraft carrier, the very presence will make the adversary think twice.
That's absolutely amazing and so well explained. Thank you, Captain. So you say that aircraft carriers serve to deter the adversary. Can one say that?
Absolutely. See, I'll tell you one thing as far as Indian Navy is concerned. Our main role is to deter the adversary. If deterrence fails, then we have to fight and win. India has never been a warmonger country, and our entire philosophy and strategy has been based on the principle of deterrence. We have clearly outlined this principle in our maritime security document, which is available on the internet. Let me quote just 2 lines from the strategy document for our listeners. India's maritime security aim is to safeguard national maritime interests at all times. And the first objective to achieve this aim is to deter conflict and coercion against India. Nothing deters better than, say, a 45,000 tons mobile airfield bristling with fighter aircraft armed with missiles, bombs, underwater weapons. Why do you think the US Navy maintains an aircraft carrier force of 11 such ships? Why is that UK, France, Russia, South Korea, Japan, Italy also focus on aircraft carriers? And Alfie, why do you think China is so focused in building aircraft carriers? In fact, they have a strategic plan to build 5 or 6 such ships by 2030. Look at the use of aircraft carriers since the Second World War. Primarily, the US Navy has sent aircraft carriers in almost every situation of war or conflict, either in direct use or as deterrence in support of its allies. Do not forget 1971.
Yes.
And why is the United States today has deployed 2 aircraft carriers in the Middle East for the ongoing conflict, or based at Guam, or deployed close to Taiwan?
Very, very interesting questions you have raised, Captain. But you just mentioned aircraft carrier groups. What exactly do you mean by that?
See, while aircraft is equipped with fighter aircraft and helicopters and maybe other auxiliary accessory aircraft, but aircraft carrier is not capable of self-defense. So that is why aircraft carrier is never deployed alone. It sails with a group of ships, a powerful fleet of ships comprising of destroyers, frigates and tankers for refueling, and also a nuclear attack submarine for underwater protection. This group is often called a carrier battle group or a carrier task force in naval jargon, which ensures an unbroken surveillance of over 250 nautical miles, approximately 500 kilometers, circle radius in all the 3 domains, that is air, surface and underwater. The huge number of radars, underwater listening devices or sonars, helicopters, aircraft, electronic sensors make it almost impossible for any adversary to escape undetected or close to the aircraft carrier. The carrier group not only has fighters and surveillance aircraft armed with missiles and bombs, but also has enough firepower comprising of land attack missiles and long range guns. With the inherent advantage of enhanced combat capability, extended reach and rapid redeployment, nobody takes a carrier group lightly.
Indeed, Captain, I feel safe already. Why do you say nobody takes an aircraft carrier group lightly? Could you amplify that point, please?
With an aircraft carrier group, you can actually control parts of the Indian Ocean where you are operating. In our terminology, we call it sea control. If I have to use few words, favorable air situation or air dominance, और in हिंदी कोई परिंदा भी पर नहीं मार सकता बिना इजाजत के.
क्या बात है?
So that is the sea control, and that is the advantage. We can control whichever part of the Indian Ocean whenever we want at time and place of our choosing. The adversary is at huge disadvantage. Let me share with our listeners my personal experience of 30 years of participating and conducting naval war games. We have found that a naval fleet without an aircraft carrier has always lost to the battle to the fleet that has an aircraft carrier. I've played on both sides of the game and found that I was up against the carrier task force, and most of my energies went in trying to avoid a battle and keep out of the range of the aircraft carrier fighters. Very, very difficult. Being a fighter pilot myself, I can tell you, I have been able to struck many surface targets at the ranges of about 250 kilometers. And I will repeat, nobody takes a carrier group lightly. Should we ever be pressurized on our land borders, we can, and I'm serious, easily cause a lot of problems to the adversary's trade in the Indian Ocean, like we did during 1971 as well. If the adversary chooses to come to Indian Ocean, all the better. Our aircraft carrier groups will have a great hunting season, and if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Well, as a common man, there's one question that keeps coming up in my mind. Aren't these expensive? And haven't we spent enormous amounts of money buying aircraft carriers from abroad in the past?
There is no doubt, Alfie, that aircraft carriers are expensive. The Indian Navy has always striven to be a builder's navy and not a buyer's navy. In fact, out of the three services, armed forces we have in the Indian Navy has been the pioneer in indigenization. We have been designing and constructing our own ships ranging from small crafts, frigates, destroyers since 1970s. And now we recently built our own aircraft carrier, INS Vikrant, by Cochin Shipyard Limited, completely made in India.
Wow.
Let me give you some ballpark figures. An American aircraft carrier, which is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, Nimitz class carrier, it cost about 64,000 crores rupees. And a conventionally powered aircraft carrier such as Queen Elizabeth of Royal Navy, it cost about 38,000 crore rupees. Can you believe it that our own INS Vikrant cost just 20,000 crore rupees? That means 1/3 of nuclear powered and half of the conventional powered aircraft carrier overseas. And you will agree with me, earlier, whenever we bought the ships from abroad, friendly foreign states, the money used to go abroad, benefiting Western shipyards. By building our own, the money stays within the country. We develop our own technological base. Do you know that INS Vikrant has been made with steel developed and manufactured by the Steel Authority of India?
I'm sure many people are not aware of this amazing fact.
So now we no longer have to buy steel from abroad for our naval shipbuilding program. I'll give you one more figure. 76% of the content and equipment on INS Vikrant is indigenous. I will also tell you which all major Indian companies have fitted their equipment on INS Vikrant. BEL, BHEL, GRSC, Keltron, Kirloskar, L&T, Wärtsilä India, and the list goes on and on. Just imagine the boost it has given to the Indian shipbuilding industry. It has created jobs, huge spin-offs, downstream effect on the local economy, and it has been witnessed due to our thrust on Atmanirbharta. Even the Indian public has started believing in the vibrancy of our indigenization effort. Our aim is to become 100% technological self-reliant, and trust me, we are exactly doing that. The Indian Navy Indigenization Roadmap and recent third edition of Swavlamban seminar was conducted on 28th October 2024 recently,
Right.
which was aimed at promoting innovation and indigenization endeavors of the Indian Navy. So I want to assure you that the indigenous efforts which has been taken by Indian Navy are progressing well ahead and well in time.
Amazing. Well, indigenization, I'm sure, is the way forward, and it brings about a snowball effect for the Indian economy as well. But what is the Navy's plan finally? How many aircraft carriers do we need projected to the government?
Alfie, you will agree with me that our country is a peninsula, and at present we have projected a need to maintain 3 carrier force at all times to the government. The logic behind that one is required on the east coast and one on the west coast, and one will remain in the maintenance period. If you ask me personally, we need 4, but a minimum of 3 is absolutely essential. As our Chief of Naval Staff has said in public recently, the government is likely to clear a repeat order for INS Vikrant to be built. Meanwhile, we are already in the process of designing a much larger 65,000 ton class aircraft carrier for the future.
Well, that was one of the most informative sessions I've had, because I've learned so much. You've given us so much food for thought. We'd like to hear you say something which would give us a tonic for our soul.
Sure. All I would like to say is that the Indian Armed Forces remain steady to defend the territorial integrity of our great country and our national interests. The Indian Navy is forever alert. Our ships, submarines and aircraft are always on patrol in the far corners of the Indian Ocean and elsewhere, ready for any action. The aircraft carriers, being the central platform for protecting and projecting naval air combat power at and from sea, can effectively impact affairs on land. Going forward, we plan to build 200 ship navy with a minimum of 3 aircraft carriers. The strong initiative for Atmanirbharta, fueled by the government, will see a robust, strong navy that is totally self-reliant and ready to take on any challenges that may come our way in future. Thank you, Alfie. Jai Hind.
Yes, thank you, Captain, for taking time out from your very busy schedule, and much appreciated. On behalf of all our listeners, we also thank you for your service to the nation. May God bless you and keep you safe.
Thank you, Alfie. I'm honored to be invited here, and I feel very privileged to share the views of Indian Navy with the listeners. Thank you.